Masechet Zevaḥim Daf Yod Chet Mechusad Begadim. We're continuing with the Mishnah that lists all different people who they are not permitted to receive the blood, Kabbalah, and if they do, then the Korban is Pasul. And the next person on the list is a Cohen who is not wearing the proper Bigdei Kehuna. Mi'nelan, what's the source? Amar Rabbi Abu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Umatu ba mishemed Rabbi El-Azab Rabbi Shimon. Some say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, some say in the name of Rabbi El-Azar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. De'amar kera, vechagarta otam avnet, Aharon ubanav, vechabashta lahem migbaot, vayta lehem kehuna lechukat olam. The pasuk is from the end of Shemot, when Moshe is commanded, go and gird them with belts, Aharon and his sons, bind miters on them, and they shall have the priesthood by a perpetual statute. What do we learn from this? Bizman shebigdehem alehem kihunatam alehem, and bigdehem alehem and kihunatam alehem. Only when they have their clothing upon them, their priestly vestments, then they have the status of being kohanim, who can serve. But if they're not wearing their bigdei kehuna, then their kehuna status is not upon them. It says that because it says here that once you put their clothing upon them, then vayta lehem kehuna, then they'll be kohanim. So yes, they're born with the status of kohanim potentially, but they cannot actually serve and use their kehuna status unless they are wearing bigdei kehuna. And now we ask, why do you need this pasuk? We have another source. So remember this pasuk, Shemot 29. We're going to keep coming back to it. So is it really from here? Don't we have a second source? Tanya. Minayin lishtuye yayin shim abad chilel tamod lomar yayin v'shechad al tesht v'gomer ulhabdil ben hakodesh uben hachol mechusar begadim shelo rechus yadam v'raglayim minayin. The Braita asks, how do you know that a Kohen who drank wine, if he serves, then he desecrates the service? And it quotes a pasuk in Vayikra chapter 10. This is after the death of Nadav and Avihu. It gives these laws. That's why, according to some opinions, their sin was that they were drunk, even though it doesn't say that in the story right before. But it's implied by saying right after that story that one cannot drink wine. Anyway, this pasuk says, "Yain v'shchar atesht atav banecha itach beboachem el moed velo tamutu chukat olam ledorotechem." So you and your sons, kohanim, cannot drink wine when you come to Ohel Moed. And if so, if you follow this rule properly, then you will not die. Chukat olam. So that means that if a kohen does come in to Ohel Moed and serve, we're going to see it applies only to certain things that he does, not anything, but it applies specifically to zidika, sprinkling the blood, or putting things on the mizbeach to burn, or pouring things on the mizbeach. Those are the things that if a kohen does it while drunk, then they will die. Other things that they do, although it's prohibited and will make the korban pasul, they don't die for those things. Anyway, it says, continuing, Lavdil ben hakodesh ben hachol ben tamer ben tahor. So you see that if they do properly, then they can properly distinguish between tahor and tamer, kodesh and chol. That means if they don't, if they come in when drunk, then they will not be able to distinguish kodesh and chol, meaning that they will make kodesh into chol. And so this is a source from which we learn that a kohen who drank wine, if he performs a service, then it will make the korban chol. Okay, so that's step number one. Now, how do we know that a kohen who is not wearing the proper clothing, bigdei kehuna, or if he did not prepare himself by washing his hands and feet, how do you know that he also, if he performs a service, he will make it chol? Talmud omar chuka ligzera shava. Therefore, both pesukim have the word chuka, and we make a gezerah shava to link them. Let's see those words. It says over here regarding someone who drinks wine that this will be chukat olam ledorotechem. And also in this pasuk here in Shemot 28, it says that these various pieces of clothing, the children of Aaron, the Kohanim, have to be wearing them when they come to the Mizbeach to serve. Otherwise they will die, and this is a chukat olam. And therefore, once we have this gezer hashava, we can learn that. Just like a Cohen who drinks wine, it says over here that it will make it whole. It'll be no good if he's performing these services. And we have a gezer hashava. So this is a source from which we can learn that the Kohen who's not wearing the clothing also will make it chol. So why do I need this pasuk from Shemot 29 if I have this gezer hashava? Ime hatam hava amina hanemi le'avoda de zar chayav aleha mita aval avoda de'en zar chayav aleha mita emala kamash malan. And the answer is, if we only had the gezer hashava, I would say, when does a korban become pasul? Only if one improperly does a certain avodah, that if a non-Kohen did it, he would be liable to mita bidei shamayim. Now, a zad, only a non-Kohen, can only do shechita. He can't do any of the other ones. But a zad does not get the death penalty for everything. If he does Kabbalah, although it's prohibited, and makes the korban pasul, still would not be mita bidei shamayim. Rather, only for the four final services of sprinkling or pouring or burning something on the Mizbeach. That's the things for which a zad would be chayav mita. And those are the four things for which also someone who is drunk would, if he did them, a Kohen, even a proper Kohen who's drunk, would be chayav mita for those. And therefore, I would only be able to conclude, based on this gezer hashava, that someone who is drunk, and therefore we're learning that gezer hashava to someone who's not wearing proper clothing, that they would make the korban pasul only in those four last rites. However, if it's an avodah that a zad, a non-Kohen, would not be liable to the death penalty in the hands of heaven, like Kabbalah, so then I have no source for that if a Kohen did it, either drunk or without proper clothing or without washing hands, then I wouldn't have a gezer hashava, because I don't even know it in the original case of Kohen who's drunk. So I would say that since he's doesn't get the death penalty, maybe if he does it, he also does not make the korban pasul. So therefore, I can only learn a limited set of items from this gezer hashava. That's why I need the pasuk from Shemot 29 to teach me that across the board, a Kohen who is not wearing the proper clothing will make the korban pasul. That includes Kabbalah and holacha and so on. Ashkechan mechusar begadim shetuye yain minelan. Okay, now we're going to turn it around and say, fine, we have this pasuk Shemot 29 to teach me that a Kohen who's not wearing his bigdei kehuna will make it pasul if he does Kabbalah without the proper clothing. But how about a Kohen who's drunk? We only know that a Kohen who's drunk, will make it pasul for the things that he gets the death penalty about, because that's what that pasuk was talking about in Vayikra chapter 10. But what about the other items like Kabbalah? And the answer is, we'll use this gezer hashava, but we'll use it in the other direction than we did before. Before we were learning from a drunk Kohen to mechusar begadim. And now we'll do the opposite. We have Shemot 29 to teach me mechusar begadim regarding all the services. And from chukah, we will learn that that's true also for shetuye yayin. V'hatana lehavdil ben v'gomer kanasibla. Hold on. The author of this baraita, you see that he says, how do you know that shetuye yayin, if he did a service chilel, and it quotes this pasuk, and so you see that this Tana is using this pasuk primarily to teach shetuye yayin, and then he's using shetuye yayin as the source to teach the mechusar begadim. So he's going in that direction and not in the opposite direction that you just went in. And the answer is mikamed likum gezerah shava. Oh, that's true, but that's before he made the gezerah shava that we just had. In other words, if you're dealing with just shituyei yayin by itself and you don't have a gezerah shava, so how do you know that he's going to make it whole? Well, I see it from this pasuk. Now, this pasuk is in fact limited to only some of the rights. So then he brings the gezerah shava. Once you have the gezerah shava, then you say, oh wait, now there's a connection open. And once you have an open connection, you can travel both ways. And now that you can travel both ways, actually it's better to travel in the other direction because we know more about the mechusar begadim, that applies to everything. So at first he learns it only from the shituyei yayin, but then it's limited. But then once he opens the gezerah shava one way, then he realizes actually it's better to do the other way. And in the end, once you have that, you wouldn't need ulahavdil ben in order to teach me that shituyei yayin would make the korban whole. So what do we need to have deal ben? Good question. We'll get to that in a second over here. But first we want to ask, wait a second, but the author of this baraita, isn't he learning mechusar begadim from shituyei yayin? So still, he said this the other way. Not only that, number one, the question before was, didn't he learn the basics of shituyei yayin from this pasuk? We say no, that was before the gezerah shava. Now he has the gezerah shava. Yeah, but even at the end, after the gezerah shava, he still learned it in the direction of shituyei yayin to mechusar begadim, not the other way that you just said. Hachika amar minayin shelo nechliku ben mechusar begadim l'shtei yayin v'shelo rechus yadayim v'raglayim tamud lomar chuka chuka legezerah shava. Now, even at the end of the braita, he didn't mean to give a direction only one way. Rather, he meant, how do we know that there's no difference between the laws as they apply to a Cohen who's not wearing the proper clothing, or a Cohen who drank wine, or a Cohen who did not wash his hands and his feet? The laws will be the same no matter what, because of the gezerah shava chuka chuka. Now, which way are you going to take it? At the beginning, we thought we had a source for shituyei yayin, and then we learned it and from there to the other two laws. But then we realized that source is limited, so then we learned it the other way around, because mechusar begadim we have Shemot 29, and once we have it there, then we can learn it the other way. But the point of this gezerah shava is that it equalizes the laws for all of them. Good. Now that we learned the gezerah shava in that direction, ela lehavdil lamali. This phrase, to separate, that's said by shituyei yayin, what is it teaching me? Because I already know that a Kohen who does any of the services while he is drunk is going to make it pasul. So what is this pasuk adding? Lichderav derav la mokim amora alem yom ataba lechabre mishum shichrut. It teaches us the law of Rav, that regarding a rabbi should not give a public lecture in which he teaches halacha while drunk. And that's what it means, lehavdil, to separate between ben atahor latameh. Not only a Kohen who's doing services, but anybody who is not totally sober and therefore has all his wits with him. Whereas sometimes halacha could be very subtle, and so you have to be full awareness to give a proper halacha. You don't drink and drive, so therefore don't drink and give a pesak halacha either. And Rav, in fact, would practice this. He would not set up an amorah. Amorah is the public loudspeaker that a great sage like Rav, especially on the holiday or on Shabbat when there's a lot of people, he would make a public lecture, and part of the lecture was halacha lema'aseh. And so he would give these public lectures. However, he would not give it from one Yom Tov to the second day of Yom Tov Sheni. Rav lived in Bavel. So he would give it on, let's say, Yom Tov Rishon in the morning, right? They had, before Musaf, they had a derasha. So then he would give it over then in the morning, or maybe at night. Sometimes they would give it on at night. So he'd do it at night or early in the morning on Yom Tov. But once he went home and ate and drank, now they would generally drink wine at most meals because the wine had bacteria in it, because water had bacteria in it, they put some alcohol. But especially on the holiday, when he'd have a nice meal with meat and wine, and then he wouldn't be totally sober. So if he's going to give a derasha in the afternoon on a Yom Tov, it's not good. because then he's going to be drunk. So therefore, he would not hold a public lecture from one Yom Tov until the next day, because he would not be totally sober. And that's what we learn from this law, from this pasuk ulhavdil. Akate mehacha nafka mehatam nafka v'natenu bnei Aharon hakohen bechihuno limed al kohen gadol shelabash bigdei kohen hejot ve'abad avodato pesula. But now we ask another question. Why do we need that pasuk from Shemot 29 that we started with? We have another pasuk from Vayikra chapter 1 that says, V'natenu, and the sons of Aaron, the Cohen, shall put fire on the altar. Now, what does that mean? Why do you have the extra word HaKohen? We already said Ben Aaron, so I know that HaKohen. Ben Aaron HaKohen. I know he's a Kohen. It means Bichihuno. That has to be Aaron HaKohen can only serve as a Kohen when he is wearing his priestly garments. So this teaches regarding the Kohen Gadol, Aaron specifically, that if he's wearing his priestly garments, all 8, that's good. But if the Kohen Gadol is only wearing the 4 bigdei kehuna of a regular Kohen, and he serves, his avodah is no good. So you see, this is a source, that's a baraita, a derasha from this pasuk that shows that the Kohen Gadol has to be wearing the proper things. Can't we learn from here that a Kohen has to wear the proper clothing, or else it's chol? And the answer is, if I only had the pasuk from Shemot 29, I might think that that's only talking about if the Kohen does services that are required for atonement, essential services that are required for atonement, then he has to wear bigdei kehuna, or else. But what if it's a non-essential, an avodah that he's supposed to do, but it's not essential for atonement? For example, this pasuk was talking about that Kohen, that they have to put fire on the altar. Putting fire on the altar, you go get extra logs and put them on the altar. That is not a service that's essential for atonement. If you didn't do it, it wouldn't ruin the atonement of the sacrifices. And so I might think, if I only had Shemot 29 and only 4 services that serve for atonement, then he has to be wearing the bigdei kehuna, or else the korban is no good. But I wouldn't know it regarding non-essential services, and therefore I need this pasuk as well. Now still we ask, why do we need that pasuk from Shemot 29? We have yet another source. This is on the next pasuk in Vayikra, chapter 1, that says that the sons of Aharon, they will arrange the pieces of the animal, the head, the fat, and put it on the fire on the Mizbeach. HaKohanim bechihunan. And here also, it says Ben Aaron. So why do I need HaKohanim? Why do I have to say that? It teaches that they have to be in their proper form as Kohanim, meaning they have to be dressed. Mikan lekohen hejot shelabash bigdei kohen gadol ve'abad avodato pesula. And this teaches us the other way around, that a regular Kohen has to be wearing 4 pieces of clothing. If the regular Kohen upgrades and wears 8 pieces of clothing, well, you might think that's an upgrade, but actually no, he's disqualified, because those are not his pieces of clothing. That's not what he's supposed to be wearing, and that is pasul. So we see that from here we can learn that a Kohen has to be wearing his proper clothing. So why can't we just learn it from here? And the answer is imehatam hava amina hanemi lechisur aval yitur la kamashmalan. If I only had Shemot 29, I would think that the Kohen he's not allowed to wear his regular clothing. He can't wear his jeans and sweatshirt from home. That's what he can't be wearing. If he's lacking any of the 4, then it's no good. But if he upgrades and wears those 4 plus 4 more, maybe I would think that's okay. And so that's why that pasuk is not sufficient, and I need this pasuk here and this derasha from Vayikra 1:8 to teach me not only if he's lacking clothing is it bad, but even if he upgrades and wears bigdei kohen gadol, also it's not good, and that's why I need all of these pesukim. Teno Rabbanan, Hayu merushalin, mesulakin, meshuchakim, ve'abad abodato keshera. Braita teaches that if the garments of the Cohen were too long, his pants were too long and dragging on the ground, or raised up, they're too short, or if they're frayed and he did a service, it's still kosher. He's wearing the pants, so therefore it's okay. Lavash shene mikhnasayim, shene avnetim, chaser achat, o yater achat, o shayta lo retiya al makat besaro tachat bigdo, o shayu metushtashin, o mekora'in, ve'abad abodato pesula. If, however, he's wearing 2 pants or 2 belts, or he's lacking one of the 4 priestly garments, or he has an extra one, or if he has a bandage on his skin such that it's an interposition between the clothing and his skin, that's no good. Or if his clothing is soiled or ripped. His clothing is supposed to be for glory, for honor. And if it looks like that, it doesn't look good. So if he has any of these problems and he does a service in the Bet HaMikdash, then that service, that korban, will be pasul. So we have 2 categories. If it's just the wrong size, or it's a little frayed, that's okay. But any of these bigger problems, it's not okay. Amar Yehuda Amar Shemuel, merushalin kesherin, mesulakin pesulin. Shemuel seems to have a halachic opinion that's against the Baraita, because he says if it's dragging on the ground too long, that's okay. It's covering all of his skin. But if it's raised up too short, then it's no good. We ask, Vatanya mesulakin kesherin. The Baraita said that too long or too short are both okay. How come you're saying too short is not good? Amar Rami bar Chama la kashya. Kan shesil lekan al yedei avnet, kan delet nehumei kara kelal. Rami bar Chama explained, there's no contradiction between Shemuel and the Baraita. If it's the right length, without a belt, but by wearing a belt, sometimes people wear their belt high, and so because of the belt they are raised up, that's when the Baraita is talking about and says it's okay. The Baraita that says too short is okay means it's actually the right length, but he raised it up artificially with the belt. That's okay. But Shemuel, who said it's not okay, that means that even when you're wearing it without a belt, it's still too short. That's not okay. It's not the right length at all. So there's no problem. Rav Amar, echadze ve'echadze pesulin. Rav says, whether it's too long or too short, too long that's dragging on the ground, or too short that's not covering all of his legs, either way is no good. So Rav is going to have a problem with both of these. Are going to have a problem. Are going to have a problem with the Baraita. We'll get to that in a second. But first, a story. Rav Huna ikla le'ad Giza. Rav Huna went to a place called Ad Giza. Remale bar Osh Piz Chaneh. He stayed in there, and the son of the innkeeper was himself learned. And he asked Rav Huna a question. Rav Huna is also a student of Shemuel, even though it's said by Rav Yehuda, the name of Shemuel. So the son asks, Mi amar Shemuel merushalin kesherin mesulakin pesulin v'hatanya mesulakin kesherin. He didn't read the Gemara. He didn't have this Gemara yet. And so he's asked the question that we just asked. Did Shemuel really say that if it's too long, it's okay, but too short is not okay? But the Baraita says that too short is okay. Amar le bar mina de'ahi deshan yah Rami bar Chama. And Rav Huna said, oh, you could don't ask a question from that Baraita. You could ask about from a different place, but not from that Baraita, because Rami bar Chama already answered it. As we just read over here, that Baraita is talking about it's too short because you raised it up with a belt. That's why it's okay. But if it's too short even without a belt, then it's not okay. Ela l'Rav Kashya. But now we go back to Rav himself, who said it's no good either way, too long or too short. How is he going to explain the Baraita that says too long and too short are fine? Vechi tema mai merushalin mesulakin al yedei avnet. Ve'avnet megaz agiz. Now maybe you'll try to reconcile Rav with a Baraita, at least in the case of being too long, as follows. Rav said that if it's too long, it's no good. That if it's too long and actually dragging on the floor, it's no good. And the Baraita that says too long is okay, the Baraita is talking about a case where you pick them up artificially with the belt. And the belt is effectively, it's like it's cutting the bottom. bottom of it. You're not actually cutting the bottom, but by raising the top. So now it's the right length. That's what the Braita was talking about when it says it's okay. All right, that would be sufficient to reconcile Rav with the Braita in the case of it being too long. But regarding the other halacha of being too short, there we cannot reconcile it because Rav said if it's too short, it's no good. Now, Rav, consistent with what he said before, means just plain, without a belt. So if it's too short, it's no good. Now, the Braita, the other case of too long, was talking about with a belt. So that would mean that the Braita says if it's too short, with a belt, it's no good. But the Braita's ruling is based on the principle of megaz agiz, that by wearing a belt, you consider it as if it's cut. And so now it's shorter. Well, if these pants, even if they were okay, the right length without a belt, once you wear a belt, you consider them cut, well, then they're too short. So then, therefore, the Braita should say that it's no good. And therefore, we cannot reconcile both cases of the Braita with both rulings of Rav. So we still have a problem. Amar Rabbi Zera, Rav hadatane, merushalin shesilekan al yede abnet kesherin. Rabbi Zera said that Rav's version of the Braita didn't have two cases, too long and too short, but rather only had one case and explained it with two words. If it's too long by itself, but one made them raised them up and made them shorter with a belt, then it's kosher. In other words, the Braita itself that said kosher was only talking about one case where it's naturally too long, but you raise it up with the belt, now it's considered to be the right size, and that's okay. However, Rav's ruling stands as it is. If without a belt it's too long, then and dragging on the floor, and you don't use the belt to raise it up, but you leave it dragging on the floor, then it's no good. And also, if it's too short, also it's no good. There's no contradiction between that and the Braita, because the Braita didn't talk about a case of it being too short. It talked about a case of it being too long, and you shorten it with the belt. That's the case where it's permitted. And by explaining that Rav had that version of the Braita, there is no contradiction. The Braita agrees that too long and too short would be no good. That's exactly what Rav said. The Braita only added that if it's naturally too long, but you shorten it with a belt, then that's okay. And Rav would readily agree with that principle. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah midifti, Mirushalin shelo silekan tanaehi. Rabbi Yirmiyah from Difti says that the case of the pants of a Cohen that are too long and they're dragging on the ground, and he did not lift them up by wearing a belt and putting the belt higher, what is the status of if he does a service in the Bet HaMikdash with these long pants dragging on the ground? Is it kosher or not? Tana'ehi, it's a machloket between two Tanaim, between the following two Baraitot. These two Baraitot are not talking about Bigdei Kohen Gadol, but rather about the laws of Sisit. However, we're going to propose that the principle behind this machloket between these two Baraitot is the same as the principle of whether you'd say that dragging pants are okay or not. Tanya, al arba kanfot kesutecha arba velo shalosh. The pasuk in Sefer Devarim that talks about the mitzvah of putting a corner on a four-cornered garment, tassels, says Gedilim taaseh lach al arba kanfot kesutecha asher techaseh ba. Gedilim, tassels, you shall make on the four corners of your garment that you cover yourself with. So these are extra words, asher techaseh ba. We'll see what to do with those. But it does say it has to be a four-cornered garment. So why does it say a four-cornered garment? Why not just say any garment? It's to teach you four, but not three. If you have a triangle garment, or you round out a corner of a rectangle garment and it doesn't have a corner anymore, then you do not have to put sisit on it. That's the proposition of the Baraita. But then it wonders, maybe the four is coming to exclude five. That if it has five corners, pentagon garment, then you don't have to. How do you know it's excluding three? כשהוא אומר אשר תכסה בה הרי בעלת 5 אמור. המה אני מקיים 4 ולא 3. Because the continuation of the pasuk that says a garment that you cover yourself with, those extra words are coming to include a five-cornered garment that it requires sisit. Therefore, when it says 4, it means 4 and it's excluding 3. Now you might wonder, why should we assume that the 4 is including 5 but excluding 3? Why not say the other way around? מרבה בעלת 5 שיש בכלל 5 4 ומוציא אני בעלת 3 שאין בכלל 3 4. Because it makes more sense that when we say 4, asher techaseh should include 5 also, because 4 is within 5. Therefore, it makes sense that to say, a 5-cornered garment is required, and 4 is a subset of 5, and therefore, just as 5 requires tassels, so too 4 will require tzitzit. And we should exclude 3 because 4 is not included in 3. All right, 3 is too little. And therefore, 3's out, has to have at least 4, but 4 or more. Therefore, that's the better reading. That's baraita number 1 that says a 5-cornered garment is required to have tzitzit. V'tanya idach. There's a second baraita, al arba kanfot kesutecha arba velo shalosh arba velo chamesh. According to this one, 4 means precisely 4. 4 and not 3. 4 and not 5. Now, what's at the essence of the machloket? The second baraita that says a 5-cornered garment is not required to have tzitzit on it, they think that something that's extra, we do count as being there. And therefore, it says 4-cornered garment. This one has 5. You can't just ignore the 5th corner, and therefore not required. When you have something extra, you can't ignore it, you count it, and therefore not required for tzitzit. Whereas the first baraita says, if you have something extra, you can ignore it as if it doesn't exist. You have 4 corners here. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Stop right there. You have 4 corners. Good. Oh, 5th one? Forget about it. Just stop counting at 4 so you can ignore an extra corner. So, too, we can apply the same principle here with the long pants. These pants, are they long enough to cover the Kohen's entire leg? Yes. Now there's extra material. What do you do with that extra material? According to the second baraita, no, you have to count it. And the extra material is going to be counted like yet another garment. This is no good. The extra material cannot be ignored. It's there, and it's going to ruin the whole thing. And therefore, not kosher. Whereas the first baraita, that said 5 corners also is required. What do you mean? It says 4. Oh, because we can ignore the extra one. So too with the long pants, we can ignore the extra material. It's long enough to cover his whole leg, right? Yes. Extra material, make believe it's not there, and then it's okay. So therefore, we can apply the principle behind this machloket of tzitzit to the machloket and assume that our case of the long pants that are dragging would be subject to the same machloket. Is that right? We answer no. No, in fact, everybody agrees, both of these, but I taught that if something is extra, we count it. And therefore, with the long pants dragging on the ground, we cannot ignore the extra material, and therefore, the long pants make it invalid, and the Cohen who does a service with them, the korban will be pasul. Everybody agrees to that. And here, what's the reason that there's a machloket? Well, this is because in the first baraita, it says there's an extra pasuk. Asher techaseh is inclusive. Any garment means even a 5-cornered garment. In other words, in general, you have to count something. So the second baraita says, well, we have to count it. And therefore, it's 5 and not 4. So it's not. So it's out. Doesn't need tzitzit. And the first one says extra words techaseh overrides that logic, and therefore is required to have a tzitzit on a 5-cornered garment. Now we ask, the author of the second baraita, what are they going to do with those extra words? If you're not going to use them to learn a 5-cornered garment, what will you use it for? It comes to teach, that is back in Parashat Tzitzit, in Sefer Bemidbar. What does it mean that you have to see it? That comes to exclude a night garment. If you have pajamas that have 4 corners, Don't have to put sisit. There's no mitzvah of sisit at night because you have to see it and you can't see at night. Now we ask, wait a second, maybe the words uritem oto comes to exclude a blind person. A blind person, since he can't see, maybe he's excluded from the mitzvah of sisit. Maybe that's what we learn from uritem oto. No. No, we use the words asher techaseba in Devarim to come and say that a blind person is required to wear sisit. It's extra words that he has to wear them also. It's true, he can't see them, but other people can see them. And so they'll see the blue, they'll be inspired. So therefore, he has to see them. Once we have the blind person out of the way, then we can use uritem oto to exclude a night garment. And so the author of the second Braita will use asher techaseba to teach the law about a blind person. Now we wonder why, the Braita explains itself, why are we including the blind person and excluding the night garment? Why not say the other way around? And the answer is, it makes more sense to include the garment of a blind person, because even though he can't see it, other people can see it. Whereas a night garment, nobody can see at night, and therefore that's the one we will exclude. Good. V'idach. Now, according to the author of the first Braita, where will they learn this law about the blind person? And nafkale me asher. Before that, in the same pasuk, it says asher techaseba. So the extra word asher will teach me the law that a blind person has to wear sisit, and techaseba, that will teach me that a 5-cornered garment requires it. V'idach, and what will the author of the second Braita do with the word asher? And the answer is asher la darish. They don't think that asher is a significant word. It's just part of the entire phrase. And we use the entire phrase to teach the law that a blind person still has to wear sisit. Tenorabanan, bad shehiu shel boots. The pasuk says that the priestly garments have to be made out of bad. So that means boots. It's another word for linen. There's a whole bunch of words that mean linen. Bad shehiu chadashim. The Braita teaches further from the same word that we learn they have to be new and not frayed. Bad shehiu shezurim. Bad shehiu chutan kaful shisha. And further we learn they have to be twisted, meaning multiple threads, and specifically it has to be twisted with 6 threads. Bad shelo yilbash shel chol imahen. And we also learned that bad, as being the word levad, has to be these garments alone, and he cannot wear any other garments, regular garments with them. He can't say, I feel like also wearing a scarf or another hat. No, he can't do that. So that we learned all these things from the word bad. Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef, Bishlam ashiu shel boots hakamash malan boots in midi acharina la. Abaye asked Rav Yosef, I understand the first thing that it has to be made out of linen. So we learn from here that it has to be made out of linen and not anything else. If it's made out of some other material, then they're no good. I agree. Ela badshu chadashim in shechakim la v'atanya meshuchakim kesherin. But the second thing that you learn, that it has to be new, and that means, yes, new, then it's good. But if it's frayed, then it's not good. That goes against the Braita that we saw above today that says if it's frayed, it's still kosher. So we have a contradiction here. And the answer is, here's all the process of turning flax stalks into linen. It's a very involved process. It has to be soaked and beaten and combed and so on. And so Rav Yosef answers him with another question. According to you, do you really think that all of these derivations is from the meaning of the word bad? And that would also mean, bad, because it says bad, it means it have to be 6-fold. Well, actually, bad, if it means levad, so then that would actually mean the opposite, that it can be just alone. Bad means alone. So therefore, it's not from the meaning of the word bad that we are deriving all these things. And therefore, if it was from the meaning of the word bad, then all these things would be absolutely necessary. And otherwise, they'd be totally not kosher. But in fact, it's not from the meaning of the word. אלא הכי כאמר בגדים שנאמר בהן בד, צריכין שיהיו של בוש חדשים שזורין שיהיה חותן כפול 6, יש מהם למצווה, יש מהם לעכב. Rather, the Braita is not deriving all this from the meaning of the word bad, but rather it's just telling you that these pieces of clothing, the garments of a Cohen, that says regarding it that it has to be bad, so certainly they have to be made out of linen. That's true. And then it's teaching you other things that it should have lechatechila. But if b'diavad it doesn't have some of them, that doesn't mean that's necessarily not kosher at all. So this braita is teaching us lechatechila. They should be made out of linen and new and twisted, and they should be folded over and twisted 6 times. Now some of these is mitzvah lechatechila to do. And some of them you have to do, otherwise it's not good at all. But it doesn't mean that all of them are necessary. And therefore the one that says new, this answers the question. New, it should be new. But if it's not new and if it's frayed, still b'diavad, it's kosher. Now, mimai dahai bad kitanahu. How do you know that the word bad means flax? The kitana, nowadays it means cotton, but this is before they had cotton. And so in the Aramaic, kitana is another word for flax. How do you know that it means that? Amar Rabbi Yosef b'Rabbi Chanina, Tavad ha'oleh min ha'karka bad bebad. So it comes from the word bad, which again we're associating with levad, by itself. And so it has to be something that grows from the ground one by one. Each stalk of flax grows on its own. Ema amra, but why not say wool? Because every hair of wool also grows on its own from the animal. Amra mifsal. No, but flax splits into, wool splits into small fibers. Even though it grows one by one, then it has split ends and it grows separately. Kitana name mifsal. Hold on, flax also splits. Yeah, but al yedet lakuta mifsil. But flax only splits when you strike it, right? You cut it down, and then you bang the flax, and that breaks it apart. So you could turn it into threads. But wool naturally breaks apart, and therefore bad, from the word levad alone, means something that grows singly and doesn't split by itself. Ravina amar mehacha, pa'are pishtim yu al rosham, u'michnese pishtim yu al motnehem, lo yachgeru beyaza. Ravina says, I can derive the law that bigdei keuna have to be made out of linen from this pasuk in Yechezkel that says it explicitly, that the Kohanim shall have linen crowns upon their heads and linen breeches on their loins, and they shall not gird themselves beyaza. Simple reading of that seems to mean sweat, that they shouldn't use wool because that'll be too warm. Rather, they should use flax, which is a cooler material. Amar le Rav Asher Ravina, veha ad data Yechezkel minelan, Rav Asher es Ravina. Great, you derive it from Yechezkel. Yechezkel lived at the end of the first Bet HaMikdash during the destruction already. So how did anybody know that it has to be made out of linen before that? Until then, Yechezkel came along and revealed this law. Nobody knew it, so that's not a good source. We want an earlier source. We answer, הערל לב והערל בשר לא יבוא אל מקדשי לשרתני עד שבא יחזקאל מנלן אלא גמרא גמירילה ואתה יחזקאל ואסמכי עקרה החנמה גמרא גמירילה. So the answer is, what do you think? According to you, what about that which Rav Chisda said? That he said, this matter, the following matter, we did not learn it in the Torah of Moshe, it's not in the Chumash, but rather it's in the Pasuk in Yechezkel, who says, any stranger and anyone uncircumcised of heart or uncircumcised of flesh shall not come into my mikdash. We learn from here that in Adel, someone who does not have Berit Milah cannot serve. A Kohen, even if he has good reason, because of health issues, and he had brothers who died from it, and he's exempt. Nevertheless, if you don't have Berit Milah, you cannot serve in the mikdash. And what's the source? So he quotes it from this pasuk in Yechezkel. We could ask the same question. Until Yechezkel's name came. Where did we know this from? It doesn't say so in Chumash. Rather, obviously, it's an oral tradition. And Yechezkel came, and he taught a pasuk about it. And he said, as if the pasuk is the derivative, is the source. But the pasuk is not the source. He's just giving a pasuk. So now you have something stronger to rely on than writing it down. But actually, it's an oral tradition from beforehand. So too, we could say the same thing here, that when it says a linen, that if I'm Yechezkel, it says linen, Ravina is saying, well, I can see that the law is true here. This is not the source of the law, that Bigdei Kehuna are linen. The source of that law is the original oral tradition going all the way back to Moshe. Everybody understood it this way. They knew that. I'm just quoting Yechezkel because it's an asmachta. It's a good source to use to solidify the oral tradition. Now, what does that mean anyway? That they should not gird themselves with sweat. I explained one reading is that they shouldn't use wool, because wearing wool will make one sweat. But we have a different answer here. Amar Abaye, lo yachkeru b'makom shemezi'ain. Do not put the belt in a place that will cause one to sweat. Kedetanya, keshem chogrin, en chogrin lo lemata mimotnehem, velo lema'le me'asilehem. As the Braita says, when they would gird themselves with the belt, don't put it all the way down below the loins, because that's where the legs are moving, the hips are moving, and the hips will move and rub against the stomach, and that's a place of sweat. Also, don't tie it all the way up near the armpits, because that also is a place of sweat, and that would be not respectful. Ela keneged asile yedehen, rather at the level of elbows. So just think when you put your elbow down, where it reaches kind of above the belly button, but somewhere in the middle of the stomach, that's the right place to put the belt, so that it won't get dirty from sweat. Rav Asher said that one time Huna bar Natan told him. Huna bar Natan was the Resh Galuta in the time of Rav Asher, the exilarch, so very important, the most important, most powerful Jew in Bavel, and so therefore he most likely that he would have a meeting with the king of Persia. And he reported that one time, in fact, he had a meeting with Izdagar, the king of Persia. He was from 399 till 420, and he was known as a very peaceful king, had good relations with everybody, including with the Jews. And so he was remembered for good. And one time he came in, and obviously he's wearing fancy clothing, and he had a sash around him. And the king saw the sash, and he lowered it down and put it closer down on his body. And he said, hey, it says about you, Jews, that you are a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And therefore, you have to look dignified. And you're wearing your sash too high. That's not the right place for it. And so the king lowered it down to say, oh, now you look majestic. Now you look like a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And so the king gave this advice about attire to this rabbi. Ki atai kamed amemad. And then Huna bar Natan said, then when I came before Amemad, I told him this amazing story that I got this fashion advice from the king himself. And he said, oh, the following pasuk was fulfilled through you. Kings shall be your oman. Oman is someone who takes care of someone, like a foster father, someone who takes care of you. So it says that the Jewish people one day will be so great that even kings will take care of you. And here you see that, in fact, this is fulfilled. King Izgadar is being like the personal butler for Huna bar Natan, and explaining to him, oh no, don't wear it like that. Wear it lower down, because you're a kingdom of priests, so you have to look like Kohanim. You have to look even more dignified. And so, what a wonderful story! It's interesting that also compares the great sages to the Kohanim. That just like the Cohen has to wear begadim, special begadim, that he has to look nice and dignified. He represents Hashem. So too, Torah scholars that represent Torah, represent the Jewish community, also have to be dressed in a dignified way. And in fact, this is the second parallel between Talmidei Chachamim and Kohanim. Also, the law that we saw earlier, that Kohanim cannot practice while they are drunk, and so too rabbis cannot give a Pesach halacha while they are drunk. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.